my headache was so significant that I actually thought in that moment that I was going to die. Mm-hmm. And I pulled out my phone because I didn't know what else to do because I couldn't see I physically couldn't look at my children. And I could hear them being hushed on the other end of the house. It just let mom rest, let mom rest. And I took out my phone and I just recorded a voice memo for them, just telling them that I loved them and that I didn't want to die.
You thought you were gone?
I thought I was going to die.
And welcome to Miracles from the Hill podcast, where we share raw stories that display the anatomy of God's grace here at Miracle Hill Ministries. If this is your first time joining us, please subscribe. And of course, you can like, comment, and leave a review. To connect with us, visit our website linked in the description box. And now, here is our host, Ryan Dirk.
Greetings, listeners, and welcome to another Miracles from the Hill podcast. We are excited that you're here with us. I'm Ryan. I'm the host. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. If you've been here before, thank you for coming back. I hope you have hit the little buttons, subscribe and like and share and all that kind of stuff. We are joined today by my buddy Lauren Stevens. Lauren is the Director of Social Services for the Salvation Army, which is kind of the other shelter counterpoint to Miracle Hill in Greenville. She's done that for 8 years. She was with Safe Harbor for 3.5 years before that. So essentially her entire career has been in helping people. She's also the chair of the Greenville Homeless Alliance, a good friend of mine. But we're not here to talk about any of that.
Exactly.
We are here to talk about surviving trauma, both external and internal of yourself. So Lauren, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and just, really grateful to have a story to share and a platform to share it on.
Amen. So we're going to just jump right into your story.
Let's go for it.
So where were you born? What was your childhood like?
So super boring geographic story. I was born and raised here in Greenville.
It's not boring.
And so, people are like, hey, do you travel? And no, I don't.
Vegas is
I don't
the
prefer
bomb.
to leave, to be honest. I was raised in sort of like the middle class of Greenville. I went to really great schools and had really great friends. And, it's one of those outside looks good, inside's a big mess kind of situations. As a kid, I was loud and boisterous, and
which is different from now.
No, absolutely did not grow out of that. Really the only thing that's changed in me is my acceptance of what that meant. And as a kid, I had a pretty stable environment that I grew up in, meaning when I look at stability now, it is with the alternative being in a homeless shelter. So of course everything was great. But I was put together very differently than most of my peers. And my dad was not a huge fan of just me in general. And that has, for all the dads of daughters listening to this podcast, there's a significant amount of trauma that came from that, of just not being liked or loved, but living in a house with that. You carry it with you forever, even though you process through it slowly and, very intentionally trying to address the falsing, like the false pieces of that internal narrative that was given to me as a kid. And I still continue to excel, but it looked very different than everyone else. A good friend of my family, he told me when I was in high school, he said, God has not even started to reveal what's behind the curtain for you. And you just have to keep showing up and keep trying. My parents finally, and I do say finally, got divorced when I was in high school. And it was very freeing to not have that just constant pressure at home to be perfect. And my mom is a wonderful person, and she was always in my corner and always defending and deflecting and trying to keep me in a land, in a space filled with hopefulness as opposed to self-hatred. Because it would have been really easy for me to believe the story. Because it was constant. It was on a loop all the time of, well, when you grow up, I'm not really sure what you're going to grow up to be. And just things you wouldn't normally say to your children.
Yeah.
And I like to kind of look at it now and laugh and I just say, well, look now. Now I am beyond my wildest dreams. And for parts of the next part of this conversation, it can appear to look like a bit of a nightmare.
So you had siblings?
Yes, one older sister.
And was it the same for her, or was she more cut from the same cloth as your dad?
She was from my childhood eyes, she was perfect and well liked. And so her trauma is very different than mine, is that she tried to buffer by being perfect my imperfections. And so she carries the grief of I couldn't make it stop for you, even though I tried really, really hard to make it stop.
So where was God in this story? Were you guys a church attending family?
So my mom and my sister and myself, we attended church. My dad didn't. And we went to a couple of different churches, just really trying to find that peer group that we could fit into, because my mom could fit in anywhere. And we ended up, I was, eventually baptized and confirmed at Buncombe Street United Methodist Church.
Okay.
And in that experience, I was in the Sprouts youth group that's at Buncombe Street, and it's still around today. And one of the...
Shout out to the Sprouts.
Yeah, shout out to the Sprouts. They're great. One of the things that we did when I was in Sprouts was we volunteered at both Miracle Hill and Salvation Army. And we volunteered on the campus that I now run. And I will literally never forget the sandwiches that we made for the bag lunches. And it was hot dog, cheese whiz, and mustard. And I remember putting those together, thinking to myself, these are absolutely disgusting. I apologize if any of your listeners, that's like their go-to sandwich. But
hot dog, cheese whiz, and mustard.
Yeah, just hard pass for me in general on that. But and I remember thinking, why do these folks deserve the scraps? Why can't they have what I would eat or what the other folks would eat? And I just remember that was a very deeply seated memory of mine, is I can remember like wearing the plastic apron and the big gloves that didn't fit because I was little. And I just remember so vividly what that was. And to me, that's how God came into the picture, is that if you see this as an inequitable experience for people you're never going to meet right now, I'm going to bring you back to this space and you will be reminded of how this feels.
So you're baptized and confirmed, but walk us through meeting Jesus.
So I didn't really have that back and forth relationship with Jesus until I was in my 20s. I had a number of friends who had passed away between high school and college, all young men, and they all passed away due to some form of alcohol, drugs, drinking and driving, or suicide. And we're talking like 16 or 17 people. It's a significant amount of folks that we lost. And I just remember thinking, why? Like, what such a waste? They were fun and funny, but they were hurt. Something in them was deeply hurt. And it wasn't really until I had just graduated college and started working at Safe Harbor that I really just started to see God in the details, which to me was more of that drawing to experience, that, I'd been hightailing it as far away from accountability to God for a long time. And because I liked my own control, because I'd been out of control my whole life, I had no control over my environment. I had no control over, what mood would I be met with at home, and out of control of myself because I didn't know what was wanted. Because when I did perform to what I thought was the standard that was a desire, it wasn't right. And so you just take all that control back onto yourself and you leave it to no one else, including God. And I remember the first time I saw a woman who had been badly beaten by her significant other come into the shelter. And I just felt this warm wash go over my entire body. And my hands started to shake. And I couldn't speak. There was no words that could come out of my mouth. And if you know me, that's a moment in time right there. And I just remember hearing over and over and over again inside my head, something I'd never heard before and a thought I'd never had was, come to me and rest. Come to me and rest. And then I just kept hearing it. And that was the only thing I could say was, come to me and rest. And my hands stopped shaking. And I lost the warm, that warm, sick feeling. And, for me, sometimes it takes trauma to bring you out of your own pit that you've dug for yourself over time to hide from everything.
So with the hardship, the trauma from your youth, and you mentioned the performance piece. Mm-hmm. So how did that trauma kind of shape who you are, but more importantly, how did it shape how you viewed God? So
I fall into that sort of achiever, performer, people pleaser category. Rightfully so. I think it was an earned position that I was trying to get to. And I just remember having no hopefulness in the successes. So when I was successful, I was like, well, it's not that great. I just remember being disappointed by the achievement itself because it wasn't what I was going after. And not truly, not in my heart. In my head, that was absolutely the goal line, was to succeed. But what is success? And it really wasn't until I started to find those victories in Him. And that thank you for these hard moments. It is really hard to be grateful while you struggle. Mm-hmm. And it is even harder to pray for things that don't feel and look like a vending machine. I really do think that was kind of when I had the shift is that, you don't pray to have prayers answered. You pray to have prayers heard. And, of course, an answered prayer, shout out to that. I would love, to have that. But it's also your perception of what you should be praying for.
So the scripture says, come to me if you're heavy laden and I'll give you rest. And then it talks about a yoke being easy, but a yoke's a yoke.
Yeah. Period. Right? Yeah.
A yoke is a thing that goes across the neck, which you pull a giant sled or cart full of stuff, right? So it's an easy yoke, but it's a yoke nonetheless. And so did you feel like God was performance-based?
At that point, everyone was. Everything, myself, every relationship I had, everything was me performing in that. And that clearly by way of the continual hard things that were happening, I wasn't performing well, because if I were meeting the expectations of God, He would bless me more and I would receive less hurt here on earth. That was how I weighed out those scales, which to me is relatively logical.
No, and I think a lot of believers fall into that trap, right?
Oh, for sure.
When the Bible doesn't say anywhere that life's going to be easy.
No, absolutely. Right? Not a single time in the written word does it say this will all be easy if you just.
Yeah. So what's your degree in? I don't know the answer to this.
Oh, I went the Party Right Through May path. And so it was sociology is my main degree. And then my minor was, what was it? Obviously, it's really significant. Recreation camp management.
Okay.
Because I was going to go the youth route.
Yeah.
I was going to help kids because I was a kid who benefited from people who invested in kids.
So that experience as a kid impacted you so much that when you were in college, you knew you were going to try to help people. You just thought
for sure.
It was kids at the time.
It was kids. And then I worked in youth programming during college, and I was like, hard pass, like, because you are not going to actually impact these specific kids unless you impact their parents. You have to get to their parents. Their grown-ups need you in order to have the trickle-down effect. If you want to, trip up that cycle, you can love on those kids. You can, be present for them and give them experiences. But if mom and dad are still very, very hurt, then that trickle down is much more significant than their interaction with me.
So how do we get to the Salvation Army?
So I became a mom in September of 2013. I had my first daughter, Piper, and I was having a really hard time working in a women and children's shelter for survivors of domestic violence as a new mom. It wasn't so much projection as it was, I was just piling on the trauma of everyone around me, and every child that came in was Piper in my head. And the amount of stress that it was putting on me to be enough there and enough at home was just, it was too much. And so I, did a bit of, that deep soul dive of, I don't like new, I really don't like change, but this is uncomfortable. And I don't think that the valleys that God lets you go into are uncomfortable constantly. And I think the discomfort comes from the push of, you've got to do something different. This isn't where I need you. And so I heard that this job had opened, the one that I have now, and so I applied for it. I had 10% of the skill set that the position required, but I had all of the heart. And
I did not know that you came straight in to this director position.
Yeah, and had no clue how to do it. It was fun.
Trial by fire.
Yeah, I wrote the book as I read it.
Okay, so what exactly do you do at the Salvation Army?
So I, as the director of social services, I oversee our homeless service programs. So our outreach, we call it outreach and inreach. And the outreach piece is going, out into the community, talking about what we do, making those connections on how folks from Greenville can help us do those things better or more efficiently, as well as outreaching to those experiencing homelessness. So you can find me in the boardroom or under the bridge in any given week. And I like that. I like the wideness of my position. No 2 days are the same. And that is legitimately how my personality is defined. And I also, overseeing the shelters and our food and nutrition side of it, as well as direct assistance to folks here in town who otherwise would become homeless themselves or are just not living in a very stable experience. And then just a large amount of advocacy for those folks who otherwise remain pretty much without a voice at all. And it is, obviously you get all the other fun stuff of being a director. I oversee a staff of 18. And all of this was the same when I took the position as it is now. The staff was a bit smaller as far as the direct service. It was just me. Mm-hmm. And it's gone from just my position to a staff of 5 over the course of 8 years. And we have some incredible outcomes. And we God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. And I really, really found that to be very, very true as I worked my way through the position that I have.
So you get into this new job, you got a baby, and then a few years go by and you get pregnant, mm-hmm. and you have Hollis.
Yes.
So this kind of jumps into where we want to get with the episode. So Hollis has some issues.
Yes.
Did you know that ahead of
all
birth?
Of it? No. So I had a very healthy pregnancy with Hollis. Everything was perfect. and she was born, and we went home from the hospital, and within like 2 days, I was like, there might be something that isn't quite right going on here.
So wait, let's walk through that. That's an important moment in time.
Yeah.
So you're a mama and something's not right.
Yeah. I would sit there with her, and she was the most peaceful child. That baby never cried. And which was quite the opposite of Piper, because, God's grace of giving me Hollis came from the fact that I forgot how hard it was with Piper. She cried constantly.
Well, she's a redhead.
Oh my God. They're both redheaded. So the argument's a bit moot. But, and Hollis would just comfortably lay in the little bouncer and just look at you, but have no interest in you. And which was fine, because at that point I was so tired, I didn't have much interest in her either. And so she started to be like sick after she would eat. But that's normal for babies. Their whole little system is just trying to get woken up. And so, and also one of her eyes wouldn't cry. It would just get covered in like gunk. And it was uncomfortable because you'd have to get it open again. And so I took her to the doctor probably 6 times in the first 6 weeks. I looked crazy, but something was wrong. And I finally got to the pediatrician that we really, really like seeing. And I said, there's just something not right. I was like, her head is constantly turned. She doesn't move her arms and legs at the same time. Like, she's just not babying in the way that I think she should. And so we were referred to a physical occupational therapy place here in town. And they started seeing her. And she was first diagnosed with torticollis. And I remember thinking, well, of course her name rhymes with what's going on.
What is torticollis?
Torticollis used to be called wry neck. And so it's where a baby's head tilts to one side and it stays that way. It's because this muscle on the opposite side was underdeveloped when they were in utero. And so it's just, you have to stretch it and grow that muscle as they get a little bit bigger. And torticollis typically kind of snowballs into other conditions such as brachycephaly, which is like the flat head side where they comfortably lay in one position so their head gets flat over there. So then you get a helmet and then you get this. And so she just continued to stay sick, even though we were going to physical therapy and all these other things. And when she was about 7, 8 months old, she was diagnosed with a posterior laryngeal cleft, which is a fancy way of saying her airway and her esophagus weren't formed correctly. And so she was aspirating everything that she ate, which when you're a baby, everything you eat is liquid. So it was terrible. And so she had like aspiration pneumonia and things like that, which she couldn't help. And so we had swallow studies and MRIs and all these things, and just to see the sort of the put together of her airway. And she had 2 different airway surgeries to try to correct her cleft. They did Botox, believe it or not, was one of the first ones. We did the least invasive first, retested everything, and then did the larger laser-based surgery after that. But she had to have every liquid she ate or drank had to be thickened to the consistency of nectar, because that was the only way she could protect her airway. And if you've ever had the pleasure of drinking something the consistency of hand sanitizer, it is less than ideal. She was constantly thirsty and then dehydrated.
So wait, hold on.
Yeah.
Thickened to like jelly?
Yes.
Okay.
Because that was the only consistency that she could safely swallow. Because it's a slowing down of her swallow, because your airway and your esophagus, they close and open depending on what function your body's performing. And her messaging systems weren't telling one to close and the other to open, so they would just both stay open. So some would go down where it should, and the other would go where it shouldn't.
Into her lungs. So before we keep going down the diagnosis side, what was that experience like? So you have a baby, and as a father, I've had babies, and you have an expectation.
Oh yeah.
Of what their experience is going to be like, and I can remember my wife being pregnant and being worried about 10 fingers and 10 toes and
right.
And all that kind of stuff. And so now you have a child, and the child has issues. So with your previous trauma, how do you emotionally react to that?
I remember actually I was in her nursery at our old house, and I looked at her when all of this was starting to sort of just unfold itself. And I remember she was a bigger baby, and so she was very squishy and just absolutely precious and wonderful to hold. And I looked at her and I said, I'm so happy that you're happy. And I was like, because you don't know anything is going on. Mm-hmm. You don't know, something in you doesn't sit right, and we're trying to fix it. And I remember I told her, as a little baby, my husband was in the other room with our other daughter, who I now have a 2.5-year-old and a sick baby, and still the same job I'm kind of inventing as I go. Mm-hmm. And I looked at her and I said, it will not matter to me ever what's wrong. Because if you have anybody in the world that was designed for this experience, it's me.
So you felt like the Lord had given you the experience that you had growing mm-hmm. up, and almost equipped you to do the opposite.
Yes.
Or in some regards, do what your mother had done.
Yes.
But give your daughters a different overall experience.
Oh, absolutely. And
so you went into fierce mama mode.
Oh, yeah. And just sort of I'm going to be who I think you need until you tell me you need something different. Giving her, even as a 9-10-month-old baby, the autonomy of, that isn't how I feel loved. That isn't how I feel that my feet are firmly underneath me. And I do that still, as I tell my kids, can you just tell me what it is that you need? Because I will do everything I can to give that to you, but I can't give it if I don't know it. And because I never received that and was constantly trying to find it.
So there's a trend on social media right now that you ask your kids, what do I need to know about you to make me a better parent? Mm. So I thought I would be smart, and I tried it with my kids the other night, and one of them told me, the thing that you need to know about me is that I think that you're handsome. And I was like, okay, this is great. Thank you.
I like where this is going. And then you asked your daughter.
The other one just told me what they were going to play with for the day. So
Fair enough.
It didn't work at their age.
Fair enough.
But I get the point, right? Yeah. What do I need to know about you
mm-hmm.
so that I can behave differently or inappropriately? And certainly a baby can't tell you that.
No, but I just want to, you begin to lay that foundation of our relationship is going to be based on the way, obviously mutual respect of one another. And even as a little baby, you just try to ingrain those memories in them that, I am not perfect, and there will never be an expectation put upon you of perfection, because that was the expectation that I carried.
So it takes a couple years for you to get a final diagnosis?
Yeah. So the summer following Hollis's first birthday, so we're in 2017 now, she began to have a developmental regression. So she had been babbling as a 1-year-old does. She walked late, she crawled late, she did all these things late, but we knew that she would, mm-hmm. just based on the physical components of the first part of her life. And in August of 2017, she stopped talking entirely. And so I reached out to her pediatrician, who very quickly a little side note for your listeners, if stuff in the pediatric world goes quickly, there's probably something wrong. Mm-hmm. And I remember we were in the doctor's office, and he said, Lauren, I'm just really worried that there's something that we can't see and that we need to see if it's there. And so I told him, I said, listen, you can straight shoot with me. I said, I got Teflon skin. Like, there's nothing that you can tell me that will scare me more than the anxiety of not hearing it. And he said, the regression coupled with everything else, it appears it is behaving like a brain tumor. And I was like, awesome. Googles, all these different things. And so we quickly got into an MRI for her, and they found that she has a birth defect called a Chiari malformation. And 0% of her conditions are easy to say. That's kind of what I've learned. Basically, when I was pregnant with her, her skull fused together before her brain stopped developing. And so basically her brain is bigger than her skull. And so the base of her brain, which is like your cerebellum and your brainstem, hers is squeezed through the bottom of her skull, which puts pressure on your cerebellum, which has to do with coordination, balance, swallowing, and other involuntary reflexes. And so every single condition that she has is explained in one diagnosis. And it took us 18 months to get it. And so after that point, we knew that the choice is, when do you do brain surgery?
Meaning relieve the pressure
Correct.
On the bottom of the skull.
Yeah, they cut a little piece of the skull out. The brain can breathe and grow. And then a lot of the symptoms would go away. And so we decided, my husband and I, that such a decision has to involve her, because it's not life or death. We learned that early on, that this will not, none of this is fatal. It's inconvenient, but it's not fatal. And to me, that sentence was told to us, that is inconvenient, but not fatal. And that was another little eyedropper from God for me to remember that for a reason. And so we decided that until Hollis can understand the long term of choosing to have this procedure done, we won't make that decision for her, because we have to live with the choice. She has to live with the outcome. And we just have always felt that our kids deserve a say in what happens to them. And I think it also comes from that my husband and I both kind of came from a place of not always having that choice. And I think faith is also a choice, a daily decision, a way to live your life. And so in order to actually emulate that for my kids, I have to give them the ability to experience it.
Okay, so let me ask a question, and I don't want you to put your current version of Lauren, put this version of Lauren in the question, right? So back up a few years. So anybody that knows you knows your strength, your fortitude, right? But there's got to be some vulnerability in there, whether it's with Jesus or with Caleb or whomever. So what did that look like during this time?
So my typical go-to external representation of it is anger. But it's not an explosive anger. It's rather a nitpicking, explode, apologize. And I just remember feeling very unsafe in that part of my personality. And a good friend of mine told me, she said, Lauren, you can visit that place, just don't stay there. And I remember thinking, that is literally how I treat my relationship with Jesus, is I visit it and I never stay. And I just felt that every single part of my life took so much of me that there was nothing left. And I don't halfway invest in relationships, and even a relationship with Jesus. And so I just remember kind of going through this cycle in my head of, would it be better if I invested more here and maybe less across everything else, and then see it pour into everything else? And so that's what I did. I got the I think it's called the Jesus Bible. It's like a pre-chewed Bible, right?
A pre-chewed?
Yeah. So it's, if you read the Bible and you're not a reader like myself, because I also have dyslexia, so reading is not fun in any capacity. And it just gets, I don't take from the page to my brain and synthesize it. I have to hear it. And so the Jesus Bible it broke down the scripture in a way that you could easily apply it. And so I was like, okay, we'll start here. And, I'm a millennial, so I started in the New Testament. So I started doing it, and I just remember thinking, man, this can be easily applied to every single one of these battles. And that's really kind of when it started to be more intentional. That I finally found an end path to something I've wanted and that has equally wanted me. I just didn't know how to get there.
It's not equal. We want God at some level. Mm-hmm. God loves us infinitely.
Isn't that?
He wants us.
And he chases you down, in my opinion.
Right.
I have felt very much found out by God more than once in my life, but I did a really good job of just deflecting it because there is a deep level of introspection that comes with complete surrender.
I love those aha moments. Like even in my walk today, we all go through seasons where we feel more connected to his word, we're more connected to prayer, and then seasons when we're in the desert, right, where we're not as connected. But then you get these moments where it's like God jumps out of of and it's
you're
like,
just like, man, look at
man, you've been there the whole time, and then it wakes back up. I don't know.
I also found that listening to music that incorporates scripture, and the one song that really got me through a lot of this first experience was Taste and See.
You gonna sing it for us right now?
I do not sing. I listen to the radio, and that is all. But it says, taste and see my goodness for you. And I just remember thinking, man, absolutely none of this feels like goodness to me.
Even in the valley, though. It's
good. I mean,
it
just helped in listening to different things and different folks that are talking in podcasts about, it just helps to have identity in something other than right now. You can look forward while looking backwards to see right in front of you. It's a weird kind of experience, in my opinion.
So, so you get the diagnosis, you kind of chart a path forward for her. You know kind of what you need to do now, what the end game is.
Yeah.
The world doesn't right itself, but
it felt like this is what I've been fighting for.
Yeah. It rights itself to a place where it's palatable. So then...
enjoyable, honestly.
Yeah.
For the first time in my whole life, I was enjoying it.
So then 2020 hits.
Yeah, and that was fun. 10 out of 10. Highly recommend. I would stay again, my Yelp review.
So it's not COVID. It's not all this other stuff, but things changed again.
Yeah. So in July of 2020, Hollis was formally diagnosed with autism. We had known for years, which is how long it takes to get diagnosed, that there was just something crafted differently in her. And the world wasn't made for her, but boy, was she made for the world. She sees things that I didn't know existed. And I started to notice these things. She will not look you in the eye. And, all these sort of like baseline things. So she was diagnosed in July of 2020. Which we knew in our hearts, but had not heard someone else say.
Yeah.
And it was hard. It was hard to know that always and forever this will be a thing. And it's not, you don't grow out of having autism. You grow into it. And, for Hollis, she is a beautiful soul, created exactly how she should have been created. And she was given to the perfect family. And the perfect family for her. We're understanding yet realistic. We hold her to expectations that she can be held to. And we deeply and thoughtfully explain the difference in our parenting to Piper, our other daughter. She's everything all bundled up in one. And I think one of the most beautiful things about all of Hollis's story is how it has shaped Piper.
How has it shaped her?
Piper is deeply empathetic. She acknowledges difference without using it against someone. She is the result of what you want hardship to create. We've given Piper the ability to communicate the way that it makes her feel. We've allowed her the vulnerability and the responsibility of being vulnerable. Just because you feel afraid, that doesn't mean you get to be abusive. Just because you don't understand doesn't mean you get to raise your voice. You won't find understanding through being louder. You'll find it through being open. We try really hard in our house to name feelings. I think people forget that kids have no idea what frustrated means until you tell them what frustrated means. You show them what frustrated means, and you acknowledge when you show those things. The only, emotion that I ever saw was anger. And so then that's my best emotion. And when you're in the hot seat, I'll get madder than anybody. You likely won't know it because the anger that I carried as a kid, I learned how to mask it and work through it. But it boils in you. If you don't release it, it's going to become a problem. So I think that all of us were being shaped through the same experience to be who the next part of the story, I think, needed to have show up.
So you get this diagnosis, which is tough, but at the same time, you're starting to not feel well.
Correct.
So go to the next part.
So I started to not feel good in the summer of 2020 prior to Hollis's diagnosis. And because, again, I'm a millennial, I was like, let's go to the chiropractor. And a good neck crack will definitely fix it. And so I go and I don't get any better. Shocking. And I kept started feeling bad, like in weird places. Like my hands were numb, but I was stressed. My back hurt, but I was stressed, lugging around 2 kids, working from home. The chair's not good. I could find a reason for absolutely every symptom that I had. So if we fast forward to October of 2020, I woke up one day and I couldn't see out of my left eye. And I was like, well, this is probably not good.
Yeah,
it was not fun. And so, but because
meaning it was blurry or it was black?
It was black. It was gone. And I called my husband down to our room and I was like, so I can't see out of my left eye. And he was like, huh? Like that was our genuine reaction was, huh? And so he said, well, just lay down and we'll, what do you want to do? And of course, I default to 9 years old and I was like, can we call my mom? Like you still just want your mom. And so, my mom came over and over the next couple of hours, my vision came back, but it was accompanied with a headache that I cannot even explain. And, I was really glad my mom was over there at that point because I was, in my bedroom, all the lights are off, the blinds are closed. And I remember I felt so bad. My headache was so significant that I actually thought in that moment that I was going to die. And I pulled out my phone because I didn't know what else to do because I couldn't see I physically couldn't look at my children. And I could hear them being hushed on the other end of the house. Of just let mom rest. And I took out my phone and I just recorded a voice memo for them, just telling them that I loved them and that I didn't want to die.
You thought you were gone.
I thought I was going to die. That's how much physical pain I was actually in. In those moments, I thought to myself, there is no way you live after feeling like this. There's no possible way you don't die. And I was so mad. I was like, come on, man. Like, all of this for this? Like, let me go out some kind of cool way or something. Like, not, laying in the bed at your house physically in just total agony. And so, I just told him on the video message thing, I said, there is nothing about me that wanted to leave. And I just went to sleep after I made that video. And as I was going to sleep, I expected to never wake up. And it was so scary to actually think you're going to die. And I woke up the next day and, oh my, you want to talk about gratitude? That was like the first real taste of gratitude that I'd ever actually had. I danced around gratefulness here and there. I was like, oh, I'm so grateful. You know, the whole thankful, grateful, blessed, that whole Southern, you know, thing you can get at Hobby Lobby. And I was just so like boundlessly grateful.
For giving another day.
That I didn't die. Like, I mean, for the first time, you know, waking up on the right side of the grass became a real thing. And I woke up, I still didn't feel great, but I felt better. So over the course of the next few days, I had a huge project at work that I was working on. The achiever never goes away. And I had to get this project done. And the due date was Wednesday. So it's Sunday when all this goes down. I wake up Monday morning, and my husband, Caleb, he was like, you have to go to the doctor. Like, there's something wrong. You don't wake up blind, think you're dying, and then wake up again and not go to the doctor.
Caleb's right.
Caleb's always right. At the end of the day, I can, you know, tiptoe around all these other things, and we can do this long project, and he's still right.
Yeah.
If he would just interject more and make me stop talking, his idea would work. And so I said, I promise I'll go Wednesday. You have my word, I'll go Wednesday.
I don't know that I've ever said that was dumb to a guest.
Right, that was dumb.
But that was dumb.
Like, I should have gone then.
Yeah.
I should have gone 3 days ago.
Yeah.
And he was like, fine, I'll go with you, which is his insurance policy that I'm actually going to go. And so go to Wednesday. I am miserable. I don't trust myself to drive. I can't feel my feet in my socks. My right leg feels like it weighs 1,000 pounds. I can't turn my head right and left. My hearing is going in and out, like all these things. And I was just like, I'm having a stroke.
Yeah.
And so go to the doctor. They do this. They thought I was having a stroke too. And this is really the part of the story where the total mountain was picked up by God. We're in the height of COVID. I mean, it's October of 2020. This is when it's all riding the uphill of the roller coaster. And I hadn't gone to the doctor for like doctor things in a really long time because it's COVID. Like, you're not going to the doctor. And so I went to like emergency MD, like one of those doc in the boxes. Because I mean, if you're trying to get into my primary care physician, I was gonna drop dead before.
I feel like that's an emergency room situation, but anyway,
yeah, the ER is expensive. Like, let me tell you about the pivot story over here. Like, I'm not paying the hospital bill. Like, I'm not doing it. You are sufficient, doctor. And so I went there, and really lovely doctor saw me, and she was like, do you feel like you're like having a stroke? Like, because you can still communicate. And so I would smile, did the smile test, the whole thing you see on the billboards. They did that. It was super cute. And they did that. And my smile on my left side was droopier. My eyes wouldn't team together. And she was like, we need to get you an MRI. And so God opens every single door I'm about to tell you about. They were like, the next MRI isn't for like 10 days. And I was like, I'm going to be dead by then. Like, I can't. And then her pager goes off, and she said, the MRI in 15 minutes just canceled. Do you need someone to go in? And I was like, I'll do it. So I go, they had like an MRI, like mobile unit there that day. It hadn't been there.
An MRI mobile unit.
Yeah.
I didn't even know there was such
a
a
thing. It's
thing.
a tractor trailer that has an MRI machine.
Get out of here.
Oh, yeah. With the side, they lift you up on this little righty gate thing, and you hobble yourself in there. And it's a total MRI suite. It was wild. So I was like, I'll do it. And so they walked me outside, and I meet this wonderful woman. And she was like, because I looked fine. That's the thing about it. The invisibility of all of this is incredible. So she loads me up in the little tube, and she was like, well, to get you taken care of, you're going to be okay. She was like, I just feel it in my spirit that you're going to be okay. And she said, but you're not going to be okay right now. And I remember thinking, that's a weird thing to say to somebody when they're getting put in the tube that's going to knock around, sounding like a screwdriver in the dryer.
Yeah.
And so I go in and do the little, if you've never had an MRI, it is miserable.
They're miserable.
They are loud and it's weird. And then you get contrast and then that's not fun. So I get out of the MRI and I walk out to leave. And she said, I just feel it really important that I tell you something. And she said, we're not supposed to tell people anything. And she said, and I'm not telling you anything about your situation. And she said, but I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis about 25 years ago. And she said, and it is hard. She said, but it gets better. She said, just don't lose the faith in yourself. And I was like, okay, thanks. So she walks me back inside and I go home. The next day I'm sitting at our board meeting for work and I am in jogger sweatpants, an oversized t-shirt, and a sweatshirt because I physically can't care now. Mm-hmm. And I get a phone call that my results are ready, but they won't give them to me over the phone.
Never a good sign.
Signal number 1. And so I go by myself because you can't have anybody go with you because it's COVID. But I never felt by myself through any of this, ever. I never had anyone with me at any point in any of this story. But I was never by myself. So me and Jesus were having some conversations on the ride over there. And I remember thinking, I trust you, but this also is really uncomfortable. Because at this point, I don't know anything.
Yeah.
And so I show up and I go to, get my results at the counter like you do for like blood work or things like that. And she was like, the doctor will see you in just a few minutes. And I was like, great. And so they call me back and the doctor comes in and she introduces herself with her first name, second signal. You can call me Ashley. And I was like, no, I won't. I'm going to call you Doctor, whatever your last name is. It feels like it's less formal. And she sits down next to me on the little bed thing. And I was like, signal number 3. Mm-hmm. And she hands me a piece of paper. And you know how you skim something and you're looking for the thing that's bolded, underlined, or red. And it said at the very bottom, it said active demyelination, signaling for multiple sclerosis. And my stomach just dropped. And I just remember thinking, what have I done? Because in my experience, you either earn it or you deserve it. And I thought, what have I done to deserve this? I haven't done anything to earn it. And look at my whole life. Why more? And so I called my husband and I told him, they think that it's MS. And he was just silent on the phone. And I think in that moment we mourned together without speaking to each other what we thought we'd have.
For a future.
For a future. You grieve that. And so I go home and then the rest is just sort of that afternoon was sort of like a receiving of friends. My husband came home from work and there's all these people in my house. And he said, do we need to get mints and a book to, so everybody gets to sign in, say they've been here. And so over the next 24 hours, I got significantly more sick. My vision went away again. Now I cannot feel. It's less the numbness and the tingling. Now there's no feeling at all. I can't differentiate hot and cold.
So what is MS?
So
I'm
MS,
going to be the ignorant one.
No, please. MS is a autoimmune disease where the myelin, which is the fatty covering that covers all of your nerves in your brain, is attacked by your immune system. And for all those listening and for yourself, if you have an iPhone and your iPhone charger, the part where it plugs into your phone, if you look right below that, over time that will begin to fray and the plastic rubbery covering will go away and then it will reveal the wires. And then over time it'll stop working because the wires are no longer covered. That literally is what MS is.
And that happens sporadically and all at once?
Yes. So I have the type of MS, it's called relapsing remitting. So in a relapse, there's active disease, which is actively chewing on my nerves, quite literally. And then in remission, all the lesions stay the same. They're all still there, but they're not actively doing more damage. And the lesion that I had when I was diagnosed, I had 6. 5 of them had been over time. They were in less important areas of your brain, which I found to be interesting, that there's you got good real estate and okay real estate. But the one that I was ultimately diagnosed with is one of the most physically devastating places, which is, it's on my brainstem. And, the prognosis for MS is that you can live a full and wonderful life with it, but you will become physically disabled from it. And that was hard to hear, especially because of where my largest lesion is. It is, I think, a very, very, it's less than a millimeter away from my motor cortex, which if it expands up, I will not be able to walk.
Okay, so let's park on this.
All right.
So
story.
all this trauma, and now you have a MS diagnosis, of which since that point in time, you've had a handful of relapses or lesions.
Yeah.
And when that happens, that puts you in the dirt for a series of days. But let's park on dealing with it. So you said that when you were getting all these diagnoses, you were not alone, and you mentioned Christ. So how does Christ help you deal with this trauma while you're still dealing with your family and your daughter's traumas?
So in the beginning, it was really hard to find that part of faith you could hold. It felt fleeting at times, but that was the faith that I was used to. This faith is a whole other thing. This is a living, breathing activation of part of you. But to have that faith, to have a functional relationship with Jesus, not a visiting relationship, is an incredible amount of dying to yourself. That myself, Lauren, I've carried myself through countless things. I got it. And then suddenly you're laying in yet another MRI tube and you have no control at all, but he still does. And so it was really just identifying the places that I was scrapping to hold on to control and just surrendering those places. You know, in my marriage, I have to die to myself constantly because I'm right still. But in my life, I have been what I depended on. And that, so far, so good. It could have been some squeakier moments, but I just had to allow myself to see the choice of there's nobody expecting me to do this by myself. And then you couple that with that professionally, I am a helper who now needs help. Oh, that was horrible as an experience. I mean, it was humiliating and I couldn't bathe myself. I was in a wheelchair. I couldn't do anything for myself. And I remember that vulnerability I'm not a fan of. I was just like, I hear the lesson and I see it, but maybe smaller doses next time would be just, appreciated because, Jesus and I, we have a comical dynamic and, for me, it's his reminders are perfect and they're timely. And I find myself stopping to give gratitude to that. I never thought I would be grateful to have MS, but I am.
Yeah. So there's some power in it, right? So, old people generally using that term, they get accused of being wise. But they also have the experience of their body slowly failing them over time, and recognizing that the body is just a bag of meat that we're rented, right?
Right,
That,
exactly.
we get from,
lease to own.
yeah, lease to own. And so what you've experienced is that aha moment that your strength, your fortitude does not come from what you have physically, but it comes in resting in the Lord, resting in who He is rather than what you think you are.
Exactly.
So how does it redefine who you are today?
So I think that it's been a bit of a foot race with me and Jesus over the course of my 33 years. I would pursue Him. I thought I was, at least. And I rested better in those moments. I had more peace when I was actively just acknowledging faith. Because I was raised in a time where you went to church, you learned the Lord's Prayer, you played church basketball, you went to youth group. You
went to the, what's it called?
Sprouts. You went to Sprouts. You were a good person. You are a Christian. And it wasn't until my best friend's dad, who's a minister, he told me, he said, it's not a checklist, right? He said, it has nothing to do with that. He said, if you say, I want you, because I know that you want me too in this. He said, the cat and mouse game of you and Jesus, he said, it'll align a little bit and He'll walk with you. He's always been walking with you, but you've never looked over that shoulder. And he said, it's not a checklist. It's not a goal. He said, you're never going to achieve Jesus. He said, you're going to pursue life with Jesus as He wants you to. And that was when I was 20, 21, and I'm 30 in a hospital bed. The same man walks in the door. And he sits beside me and he said, this could have been, this could have been much worse than it is. He said, but you listened to that part of you that said, you got to go. And so, Jesus just kept even when I felt isolated, having an invisible disease is the most isolating and lonely thing you'll ever go through. But in those lonely moments, I just looked over that same shoulder and I knew that if I have climbed all these hills over and over and over again, I didn't climb it by myself. It wasn't a solo, hiking trip. It was boundless faith. I just was a poor recognizer of it. And, once I stopped running the other direction and, hitched my wagon to, back to Jesus, I have found nothing but gratitude. And people, some folks who are maybe less faithful than I am, and they'll say, how do you do it? And I'm like, I don't do it. He does through me. I am simply the body that got stopped. And, I had to grieve, deeply mourn who I thought I was going to be.
So how has it changed you as a mother, and how has it changed you as a helper with the Salvation Army? As a mom, it has made me appreciate the small moments, where I never was good at being. Just be still. And this has made me still. I have 10% of the energy that I used to. I am not the mom I thought I was going to be. And in the beginning, that was so sad to me. That I was the mom that my children didn't get to keep. And that broke my soul. I mean, it really did. To know that
their mom, they will never remember me without MS because they were so young when I was diagnosed. And to me, that was so sad. And it's that grief piece. You go through the stages of grief, right? And so I kind of hung around the mad stage of grief for a little while. But as a mom now, it's just an awareness of my limitations and that they actually are not limitations. They are gifts of moments of calm and present and one-on-one and having good conversations with my kids and doing things slower. Everything was a race to the finish line, that there is something to achieve. And, to have MS, it's the racetrack has just gotten wider. It hasn't gone away. And I can take more time with things. And so it really has changed me as a mom in the sense of I can't do 97 things in one day, but I can do one, and that one will be intentional, and it will be the pace that the family should be going at instead of the pace of the world. I mean, God gave me an incredible gift and I also want to make something very clear. God did not give me MS, period. It happened. But God gave me the internal ability to not let it be the end of the story. And as a helper, well, first of all, that was a tough sell to go from being the one who helps and fixes to being the one who needs help and needs to be fixed. That was a tough call.
Yeah, but a great lesson.
Well, listen, it could have been in a smaller dose. That's, swap is kind of what happened. But I remember I was in the hospital for a week when I was first diagnosed, and then I took a week off after that because, again, control problems. And I went back to work the third week. But it's still COVID, so you're like quasi working from home, not working from home. And so one of the girls that I work with came and picked me up because I couldn't drive. She came and picked me up, and we went to campus because my computer had
I'm assuming shout out to Taylor.
Shout out to Kelly.
Kelly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Shout out to Kelly. And she came and picked me up, and we came on campus because my computer had detached from the server and I had to get back on the server to work. And I got out of the car, and I just saw this big group of guys from our men's shelter that were walking up towards our administrative building. And as a person who has operated shelters, you're like, oh gosh, what happened? Because normally when you get swarmed in the parking lot, someone's telling you something. And so we park, and I get out, and she gets my cane out because I'm walking with a cane at this point. I have leg braces on because there's just a lot of communication issues with my brain and body. And I start walking towards my office, and I hear the shout of a very familiar voice. And it was, Miss Lauren, Miss Lauren. And so I turn as fast as I can turn, which is painfully slow at this point. And I turn around, and it was a longtime guest of ours who has a tough story. And he said, are you okay? And I was like, kind of, like I'm better than I was, but I'm not to where I will eventually be. And so him and I'm probably 25 men, no kidding, all walks of life, young, old, black, white, believers and non-believers, all came up there, and they said, we heard you were sick, and we just wanted to know if it would be okay if we prayed over you. So there in the parking lot at our campus, I had, folks who were praying for me, a person who goes home every night, who has a car, who speaks the language of where we are, who has education, who can communicate, who has health insurance, who has a support system, and y'all are praying for me.
Grew up going to Sprouts, and they're praying for you.
And they're praying for me.
Yeah.
And so to me, that was, again, it was just one of those moments where if you don't see God in the midst, you do not have eyes. And they prayed that, that I would be healed. And I think one of the things that sticks out to me in that prayer, and I remember this part so vividly, is what he said was, God, heal the parts that you see need to be healed and leave the others as she needs to live with. And I remember thinking, I sure would like to feel my feet just as a shout out. That'd be a solid, throw that one up. But, and so ever since that moment with those 25, 30 men from our shelter in the midst of COVID, can't feel your feet, can't drive your car, can't do steps, I was prayed for by people at the very bottom. Mm-hmm. And if that doesn't humble you, in that moment, humility is one of those things I tend to be a bit allergic to, but it was.
And the irony is, Lauren, you're probably prayed for them frequently. You just don't perceive the need for prayer from them frequently.
Right.
Right. But in that moment, it meant something different. So I got one last big question for you.
Okay.
So out there, maybe listening to this podcast is somebody who is entering their own season of struggle, right? Whether it's a diagnosis or addiction or a death they're dealing with or something. What would you tell them to do?
I would say that the thing that has gotten me through, the hardest parts is the recognition, and I found this through my faith, is that the top of every mountain is the bottom of the next one. And giving yourself those small incremental victories is paramount to being able to even believe that there's another one. And, I went from a wheelchair to a walker to a cane to leg braces to now I don't have to have them. Every single step was another mountain. And if you just have enough faith that, it's the mustard seed idea, right? It really is that if you just have enough faith in anything of yourself and give the gratitude to the giver, I think that, finding gratefulness as you're in a season of struggle is relying on the experiences of the struggles you've already overcome. Not everybody has had a traumatic childhood, but everyone around you is going through something. And I think the invisibility of turmoil is the hardest part. Is even if no one else sees it in you, you do. And your eyes are enough to see how hard this is. And I think that if you actually functionally can say, God, thank you for this struggle. And thank you for trusting me with this. And that I trust you back. I think trust is really important to the human side of this equation, is that I trust my faith enough that it will be sufficient. And I think that over time, that has not always been the story. I have been perfectly enough for everything.
Yeah.
But now it is recognizing that my own deficit in self is fulfilled 10 times by Jesus. Because everything you chase, everything that you pursue to fill that void, to fill that hole, alcohol, drugs, overspending, overworking, all of those things that you go to fill a void, avoidance, it will betray you. It will betray you every time. It may take time to betray you, but it will betray you. But if you fill that void with Jesus, it will never betray you.
You said something, I wrote it down when you were talking about Hollis. You said that that the world was not made for her, but she was made for the world. Mm-hmm. So, God's word tells us that we are royal priests, chosen race, a people for his own possession. But at the same time says that we are sojourners, aliens and exiles, that we're not made for this world. But we get this awesome opportunity to walk with Jesus through it for him.
Yeah.
And sounds like the Lord used a very tough situation in your life to show you that he's the crutch that you need all the time, rather than just when you're having
Right.
MS.
Yeah. And so, for example, with Hollis, and I think this is a really good way to, if we're at the conclusion part of our conversation, we have a tree in our front yard near our driveway. And the tree, I only recognize a tree when the leaves are everywhere, right? Because I am of that sort of side of the world. You notice the mess and not the beauty sometimes. And one day we were getting out of the car and she said, "Mama, do you see that?" And I was like, "I don't see that. Can you show me what that is?" Because you never know. You truly never know what you're going to get out of Hollis. And she was like, "Well, come with me." And so she grabs my hand and she walks me over to the tree at the end of our driveway. Every single leaf is the same color. Every single one, except one. Right in the middle. It's a bright orange leaf. And she said, "Did you see that? Did you see that one leaf?" And she said, "This tree is the world, and I'm that orange leaf." And I said, "You absolutely are that orange leaf, baby." And she has bright red curly hair, and she's stunning, and she's sweet, and she is purposely made exactly how she is, and she's unapologetic. And she talks about Jesus more than anybody in our family.
Newsflash, so are you, friend. Right? You're made exactly the way the Lord wanted you, and he wanted you for this moment in time to have this issue and to deal with it and to be able to still tell people how good he is.
Oh, constant.
Right? As an orange leaf or
Yeah.
brown leaf or whatever color leaf you are. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Would you honor us and close us by praying for those people that are going into their own trials and tribulations?
Of course. Absolutely. Dear God, I just want to say thank you first for your love for all of us, no matter how far we run from it. I want to say that you are the missing piece to the puzzle on the coffee table. And we are so grateful that no matter how long it takes to find that last piece, you never move and you never leave. And we, as a people, want to say that all the things that we think and do and try to be are to be in your image. And we are grateful for all of the opportunities that you give us to love you by loving one another. And for every single one of us out there that is going through something that feels never ending, and that the bottom keeps moving, and that you don't trust the rug because it might slide. If it does slide, you won't be sliding on it by yourself. Look over that shoulder and remember that a relationship with Christ is there should you want to pursue it. Thank you, God, for all of us that make life make sense, even in the midst of absolutely nothing making sense. And be with those friends of mine and Ryan's and those of us who are listening that serve the least and the lost and the unloved, and just stay with them constantly, reminding them of your boundless and complete and total love of them, just as you love me today. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, friend.
Thank you, Ryan.
Goodbye, everybody.